everyone who's just dialing in now, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. This first talk is called Reimagining Industry, the Transformative Tech Panel. I don't want to steal your thunder, so I'm going to let each of y'all introduce yourselves, say a little bit about what you do, what brought you here, the kind of work you're doing now, and we'll keep this casual. So only answer the questions you want to answer, and we'll go in whichever order feels natural and see where the conversation takes us. Reminder to everyone listening, please submit Q&A. We want to hear your questions, and we're going to leave some time at the end to answer them. Hit the Q&A bubble to type those in as they pop to your mind. So, Maddie, I see you first in my window. Would you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I'm Madi Palermo. My background is in product management and digital technology. So spent several years at Harris Teeter, and before I left there was leading the digital technology and customer experience team. And from there, got the awesome opportunity to open a digital incubator for Kroger. We called it Kroger CLT. And there we focused on building what we called next generation products for the customer. So back in Cincinnati, where the rest of the digital team is, focused on the core. So like really building out our core business. And my team was focused on what are the next products that the customer may or may not stick to, right? So like Google Assistant, Alexa, wearables. We were in like a fun space. We failed a lot, but we also had some really cool successes. And then so was at Kroger for a few years, and then most recently led product delivery for Trisata, who's an AI software unicorn in Charlotte. And there I led our strategic client implementations for all our software implementations, and also spearheaded like our agile transformation. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much. Valerie, I see you next in my window.
Thank you. Hi, I'm so glad to be here. You're doing such a great job with all of this. So
thank you for joining us.
Glad for the opportunity. I am an organizational change manager. I specialize in business transformation, but I specialize in the people side of change. Every time we introduce something new and technical, like so many people are using Zoom across America, if the user interface isn't necessarily intuitive, people need to learn, and it changes the way they do their job. And to achieve optimal performance as a team or in a department, people often need to understand what their new role will look like in the future, their new technology, how it will help them or hinder them, and how they can best perform for the company. So my job in organizational change is to define what's new and different for people, how it'll affect them, how it'll affect the company, and their customers and other stakeholders, and find the best way to optimize the new digital technologies for the people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. Niema Alimohammadi. I am part of EY's digital strategy and transformation practice. And I lead our Be Digital offering, which is really focused around digital reinvention. So as you're implementing digital technology, what does that actually mean for how you work? So a lot of future casting and reimagination of work. In addition to that, a lot of work in the employee experience space. So how we apply kind of customer experience, tenants to the employee experience from a technology, culture, real estate perspective. And then lastly, you also come from a change management background, so really supporting digital adoption too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, let's get started. I see folks are dialing in. Thank you again for spending your evening with us. We're going to start off by kind of diving into some of the broader terms, right? Let's kind of lay the groundwork here. So in your own words, please define digital transformation and describe what that means to your business. Whoever wants to go first.
I'm glad to go first. Digital transformation, meaning data, ones and zeros, as it began. as data changes, how we manipulate data, how we create new technologies to make our businesses more efficient, more effective, more consumer friendly, well, we are connecting all of those data technologies together, particularly in larger companies and enterprise technology. As we change things, it transforms the way we do business. We've been saying for decades, I want to do things better, smarter, better and smarter, and certainly faster. And well, we're there, but we're not satisfied. So we're reinventing as we go along and making things hopefully better.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Valerie. So to add some new color, I guess I would say, I see it a lot in digital, in companies going from being very like output driven, so project task driven. I got that done, checkbox, to very outcome driven, right? Because really technology and data, we should be using it to solve problems for customers. And so we have to first identify those problems. And so the biggest, and it's the larger the company, I think the more we struggle. The biggest shift for me and what I would say is digital transformation is becoming driven by the outcome, by the objective and key results, and less so on did we get the 5 things on that roadmap that we all thought 2 years ago was the thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And just to kind of piggyback on some of the comments that were made, I mean, I think digital itself is probably one of the most overused and misunderstood terms in the business world. And it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I think what typically gets lost is digital is unfortunately synonymous with just technology. And I think companies that do digital transformation effectively, what sets them apart is their ability to actually think about technology as an enabler and rather transforming really how they operate in order to be more customer centric, right? To be more agile, to deal with events like this, for instance, to be able to have that flexibility, both from a technology perspective, a human capital perspective, and a capital perspective, quite honestly. So I think it's really helping clients understand the power of technology in order to do all of those things.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, the next point, for those who are tuning in, who are totally new to the transformation space, how would you describe the process of identifying an opportunity for transformation, developing that solution, and implementing the new technology at a high level? Because I know that's an extremely loaded question.
Madi, you touched on this, and why don't you start off?
Yeah. And transformation is such a buzzword. Like I just think of maybe you have an idea. And what I have found, and I'm interested to hear what you guys think, but the teams have great ideas. So you really do need a great product manager who knows, and I know we might get to this in a little bit, but the product manager is typically the one that owns that prioritization of the ideas. And so they need to know everything about the market, the business, the tech, the data, the customer. And after you prioritize and you pick that best idea, I think it's all about, John Doerr says, ideas are easy, execution is hard. And I think he is so right, at least in my experience. So we've tried to, over the years, through trial and error, find a prototype process, or a discovery process is another way of saying it, where you take an idea and we can send out some resources after this, but like a Google Design Sprint is a perfect way of trying something like this out. You take 4 or 5 days. I know there's a lot of great companies in Charlotte that do this too. 4 or 5 days, and you really go from an idea, and you've got the right people in the room in the first 2 days. You go from an idea to a working, kind of ugly piece of paper prototype that you're putting in front of a few customers to just initially validate that concept. So at a broader level, you're trying to go as fast as possible without spending dev resources, right? Because that does get expensive. If you don't do any validation, you've wasted it. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about it and how it's worked for me.
One thing I'll add on to that. I mean, I think that iterative process is so important, and it's at the heart of it, because I mean, quite honestly, you can transform anything with digital if you really wanted to, right? That's the beauty of it. And I think a lot of companies or a lot of organizations for that matter, fall into this trap of thinking digital transformation means replacement, whereas it should be reinvention. And I think to Maddie's point, that cycle and that iterative process of prioritizing, kind of breaking down kind of those segments of work, I think is a really powerful way of approaching it.
Thank you all for that. And sorry for the barking dog in the background. Work from home struggles, am I right?
Glad it wasn't mine.
She was so good yesterday and on Tuesday, but today she's feeling sassy, so we'll see how it goes. So what are some of the most popular emerging technologies that folks are implementing today? Like, what are you seeing the most use of?
Backgrounds in Zoom.
Backgrounds of Tiger King.
I think we're about to see a major transformation just because of the conditions of the world. From what I'm reading, the work from home concept is here to stay. Not just because of pandemics, but people and companies have realized that many employees can work from home very effectively. We've been doing it for a decade, but now we have the workplace working from home. Most office workers are at home. So I think we're going to see emerging technologies and trends to help expedite security and expedite data security and cloud security. Things to make it simpler for people. A lot more online learning, even though we've been doing that for the past 5 years. I think we're going to find more tools for greater learning opportunities online rather than gathering together. And then we'll also find ways to adapt those technologies to our social, to build better teams, and for managers to use them, those tools effectively to work with their teams.
I'll kind of add something to that. I mean, I think from a technology perspective, I mean, there's a lot of different emerging technologies right now that are kind of shaping the landscape. So, you know, top of mind for a lot of organizations right now is process automation, application of AI, machine learning. You know, obviously there's kind of the more popular things right now like voice and in all this. But I think one of the things I think is most fascinating is really what's happening around data and the use of data, really around creating greater personalization for customers and employees alike. And so I'd almost kind of frame it as the, you know, Amazon experience is really transforming all parts of the business right now. So that application and use of data analytics is, I think, a really fascinating space.
Are you saying more predictive, customer predictive?
Absolutely, exactly.
Recommended products and services, yeah.
And to add on to that, and I'll give like Triseta a little plug here too. If companies don't have a distributed file system in which they can scale, at which they process and store and manage this data, at some point in the future, and it's probably not so distant, you will struggle to keep up with that and to be able to generate segment of one real customer insights on a hourly or daily, you know, schedule. So that's a big thing that I think companies are investing in now, and I think you're going to have to continue to invest in that because that will be the future. Oh, you're muted.
We got a comment from someone that's having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. Do you mind projecting a little bit more for the next one?
Yes.
Thank you so much. So next question, which technological advancements do you think have been most impactful in changing the way that we do business?
I'll start. I think just the whole concept of linking across the enterprise, that we've gone from enterprise resource planning systems to now how do we take that to our complete marketing and distribution system, and that's a huge change. Because now we're linking supply side to demand side, not just at the manufacturing plant, but when you look at Amazon with predictive analytics, I think you're going to find a lot more companies going to using data in the same way that Amazon would. Now, I have to give a caveat there. Not all companies can scale to the size of Amazon. And the majority of the companies in the United States that employ 70% of the workforce actually are small and medium-sized businesses, and they can't afford that type of technology. But we could, when what I found is that when entrepreneurs don't know that they can't do something, that digital entrepreneurs seem to find a way to introduce new technologies and scale it. And I'm not saying that it can be for everybody, but if they can enter a marketplace, a position in a market, and they don't have a barrier to entry by a large company with the types of technology that big companies use, then we can introduce those technologies to smaller companies. And we're going to find more and more people than just having their sales force, which is very effective. Having salespeople out in the marketplace asking their customers what they want is still very effective, but they'll be able to scale their operations a little bit more effectively with data and some of the solutions that we see in larger operations now. I think we'll trickle those down.
If there are no other thoughts on that one, we're going to jump ahead. I'd love to talk about our current climate. I know we touched a little bit on this with the remote workforce, but how do you anticipate the way that COVID-19 will impact technological innovation and just transformation in general?
I mean, just in the past couple of weeks alone, I've been forced to look at, my life has always been on a whiteboard and stickies. And so, one, I don't even have that at home, which is crazy. So I actually didn't even have to buy one. I found a couple tools online. Mural is a really awesome one that a good friend of mine gave me a tip on. But I think us having to be remote is forcing us to think about how do we become a remote workforce, right? So we're now having to adopt tools that we've just never felt comfortable trying, I think, before. So I don't know if every industry, and I still believe that teams work really well when they sit beside each other. So I don't know if it'll totally go to full remote, but we're definitely proving that we can collaborate and do technical storyboards, right? And do like massive brainstorming sessions and release planning sessions. We can do those things remotely. And I don't know if we've proven that before.
Yeah, I think that I agree. I think one of the interesting things about this event is I actually saw a meme a couple days ago that said, who's been driving your digital transformation? And it was the CEO, CDO, Chief Digital Officer, and then COVID-19. And I think this event has really kind of brought to light the fact that there is a lot of capability that can be adjusted to remote collaboration using these types of platforms to actually get work done and be as effective, be as productive. So I think that's been fascinating. I think the other important thing that's come out of this event too is it's really shined a light on where a lot of underpinning industries are struggling or really lagging behind. And it's kind of shown how they really need to expedite their digital agenda quickly because of, being able to manage a situation like this. I mean, the very notable ones right now, I think, that are getting a lot of press coverage. Obviously, state governments are getting completely slammed right now with the volumes of unemployment cases, and they just don't know how to handle it, right? It's a highly manual, in-person process in a lot of instances. And same goes with banks. Banks have been in a lot of dimensions on the forefront of digital transformation, but I think right now they're starting to realize a lot of that back-end operation really needs to get revamped quickly, because in this day and age with the rate of disruption, whether it's market-driven or event-driven or technology-driven, that flexibility has to naturally just be a part of your DNA.
Yeah, that's such a good point. The back-end operations, I totally forgot about that, especially with the financial institutions. Like, good things are coming out of this, painfully, but they are.
I think we'll also see a very large change in the return to work for those who are under stay-at-home orders now, that you're going to have a tidal wave of work while people are readapting just humanly to being with each other again and working through the fears of leaving their home, and then the possible waves. What people anticipate and the fears that they're experiencing right now, and the reality of we have no cure for this wave of COVID-19, that I don't think people are going to be as productive in a return to work as we want them to be. And then there's going to be a wave of backlog. And I have one other dark side of this, is that because everything is so vulnerable right now, that this means from a data security point, everybody's network has become more vulnerable, with people working from home on personal devices or some company devices, but on home networks. And that vulnerability, there's all kinds of different digital attacks that could happen. So you're attacked when things. I've come from a 15-year of defense background, so people are attacked when they're most vulnerable and most unaware and most unready. That's the greatest opportunity, and I'm sure our national government knows it, but not necessarily the local and city governments and state governments.
Next topic of discussion, talking about the consulting side of transformation and actually working with these clients. And I'm really curious to hear what you have to say on this one, because I've just heard such a variety of responses from folks who are working in similar roles. So do businesses tend to know what solution will best meet their needs, or do they largely need to rely on you to determine those solutions?
That's a smiling question to ask a consultant. I think that a lot of our clients, and I think, Maddie, you brought this up earlier, I think a lot of our clients already have the answer, right? I think it's where they have a lot of trouble and where they would look for consulting services is really what they need to prioritize and how they actually have to do it. Our clients know better than anyone exactly where they have where they're doing things the best and where they're doing things not that great. So, right. I think they have the knowledge to really understand and pinpoint where they need to prioritize. I think where folks like us come into play is really to help them rationalize that effectively.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if I have anything else to add. Just maybe another word that came to mind was like facilitating. Like, we help facilitate that process and help get out. There could be a lot of ideas, and how do you help facilitate and move, help them move fast? Because sometimes moving fast is uncomfortable, or leaving things behind is uncomfortable. And to be, digitally first and aware, you have to change some things up that normally haven't been comfortable in the past.
Thank you.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think this ties very well into our next topic of change management. So
We can jump ahead there if you want to talk about change management. Really, as we've covered, tech is created for people. It's to be used for or by humans, right? So when you're transforming something, you've got a plan for the implementation of that. So I know, Valerie, this is your great passion. How could business leaders prepare for the implementation of these technologies, knowing that's going to affect every employee, every stakeholder that's touching that new technology?
well, I think Niema and Madi touched on it right there. And if people in organizational change are engaged in the market assessment and the needs assessment from the very beginning, then we know that we got the right set of tools and technology and maybe the right input devices for those new technologies for the workforce and for the customer. And sometimes it's even for the supplier to tie into the supply chain. So if you engage and do the proper assessments of what are the capabilities and the needs that would facilitate the people who are going to use these new technologies before we contract to purchase them, it assures, first of all, that you make the right choice. And then after you have, with that, you have a stakeholder analysis. So you know what your people who will work with you using those new technologies need and want. And you can then explore the best way to help them adopt and adapt to it.
Yeah, and I would, just to add to what Valerie said, I'll take a non-techie approach to this answer and say that I think the biggest thing we all need is really great leadership, because for companies that are not there yet, and it's a curve. So for companies that are going through it or not there yet, the best thing you can do is have great leaders that are going to be okay moving a company and a team and teams through this change, and building out autonomy and building out the right teams and the right setup and the right process. And that takes, I think, courage and trust, and you really have to have that at the top. So that's really important, and you have to have that to move forward.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add here is I think change management right now is so fascinating, because when you think about it, it's such an interesting point in time, right? And what I mean by that is we're in an instance where we have so many different generations working under the same roof right now, and that's never happened before. And that creates just so much complexity around how you engage people and engage them in the right way, right? And I think at the same time, when we think about just the sheer rate of disruption that's taking place, that's unprecedented. I think change management, that conceptually kind of builds off this framework that you have periods of freeze, status quo, and then there's some disruption that takes place, and then you go back to new status quo and freeze. And now change is just constant. And so one dimension of it is helping the organization be flexible to deal with that, but then also that emotional side of helping people deal with that is just so important in successful transformation. And I think a lot of clients, I mean, speaking firsthand, I think that's the thing that they struggle the most with, is understanding
I agree.
the humanity of getting someone to change, especially when you think about it, it's someone's livelihood, right? It's something that they've been doing for years at times. So I think it's just very fascinating, all the behavioral side of transformation.
I want to add and tag on to that, Niema. I think what we've had, I think change management in itself is changing, because we have so much transformation going on in the world and in the workplace and in technology, that leadership has not necessarily been changed to be transformative with their company. Oh, good, I'm so glad the change management people arrived. Go do that thing. Well, no, that's the leader's job. And what we have not done a good job of as consultants in change management is convincing leaders that, no, this isn't my job, this is our job. And I will teach you and all of your management to be better leaders of change, so you have an agile, transformative workplace that knows not a there we go again, this is the new way of business. We will transform to be better.
Absolutely.
There's one more thing I want to explore before we open up. I've already seen a ton of questions come through, so I'll leave ample time for those. What roles are necessary to bring about transformation? I mean, like change management teams are essential, but just describe what the ideal team looks like, and even the consulting team, but even what it looks like bringing that change into maybe a client's business.
I've already addressed that. I don't think what we've been doing is adequate. My dream team in change management would be a team that can work with leadership to train them before we even initiate. That we have an education that's long-term. It's not a 10 to 4 hour workshop and boy, bingo, I waved my magic wand and you are now a change leader. That would probably be a 4 to 12 month training period for leaders, and just tiny bits and pieces and workshops and touch base. But that would be the beginning of it. And while we are implementing, I would have people from each, and I do this now, I have people from each and every functional area participate in defining what's new and different, what will change, and how do people what do people need in order to accept the new transformation? Who would be the best teachers if we need to teach people something new and different? I mean, I'm a pro-sci advocate, but I don't think that pro-sci change management is adequate for what we need to do today. I think we need more than that. And I'm sure you all have some things to add to that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll jump in. Someone who has that change management background, I couldn't agree with you more around that piece around ProSci. I mean, I think fundamentally it's a sound, methodology, approach, et cetera, but I don't think that it necessarily is nuanced in today's environment as it should be. But that original question around, what does it take to do transformation effectively? I think a lot of organizations aren't tapping into using feature teams or pod-based teams as effectively. I think there's a lot of value that comes out of bringing a cross-functional team together to be focused and dedicated to something. A lot of times what we see with clients is there will be a technology transformation that's taking place in one part of the organization, not realizing all the upstream and downstream impacts that has. And I think by thinking about something more holistically, I mean, it's just natural, you're going to have a better likelihood of success.
My answer is maybe just a little bit different, just because I come from more of inside the client. And I agree with everything you said, both Niema and Valerie, but I would also add, sometimes I've seen success when we actually do take one pod, or we take an autonomous team, right? That you have limited dependencies upstream and downstream. So maybe there's a API team and then an app team. So they're both, dependent on each other, and we put them through the transformation first. I think sometimes, and it might be different now, but at least a couple years ago, it was scary to say we're going to transform all 600 of you digital associates into running this inspired methodology where the product manager is the CEO, and you make the decision, product manager. You don't have to go and talk to the VP of merchandising and the VP of operations. We're still working through that. So you're absolutely right to truly make an impact. The whole organization has to be bought on. But at least in a larger organization like Kroger, actually starting small and doing some autonomous projects where upstream and downstream was minimized, and then we could prove value quickly. That kind of helped create success stories, and it kind of helped further that story along. So.
Totally agree. I think one of the things you brought up that had me a grin on my face was so many times I think clients don't take that pilot and test and learn approach. And I think there's a lot of value in doing that. And I think the other part of it is what I've seen is they assume if you do a pilot, you have to have it fully baked and there's a success, success has to come out of it, when in reality, you want to fail. And I think a lot of people forget about, there's a lot of beauty that comes out of failure. So be comfortable with failing fast.
Good.
Totally.
Great.
I was waiting for someone to bring up failure. If someone didn't, it was coming. Awesome. Well, I know we have a ton of questions from attendees. I saw one come to the chat first. We'll start there, then open up the Q&A box. All right. What is the industry seen? What industry has seen the biggest uplift digital transformation aside from healthcare follow-up? Has this transformation been on-premise or cloud-based, i.e. as part of the cloud-based, I think that was meant to say, as part of the cloud migration? And read that one again. Which industry has seen the biggest uplift digital transformation aside from healthcare? And has this transformation been on-premise or cloud-based, part of cloud migration?
Well, I'll just say retail, right? Like we used to all go into a grocery store, and guess what? COVID is making that harder to do. So retail, including like Macy's and all those, and then grocery retail. I will say that to move fast, yes, we utilize cloud. We have, I've seen more cloud partnerships than on-prem. Those on-prem resources are very valuable, very expensive, at least from my expertise, and a lot of them work for great consulting companies. So it depends, right? Some companies want to invest and build it on-prem, and some companies choose to partner with a cloud provider. So my experience has been cloud partnerships, and it's gone pretty well.
I'll jump in. I think that's a great question. My take is, I think the beauty of digital transformation has been how it's creating such cross-sector convergence. And you're seeing so many new entrants in places they haven't been, right? So if you think about, technology companies, they're getting into the retail space, they're getting into the healthcare space. They're getting into banking, right? I mean, you have these products like Apple with their new credit card with Goldman. So that I think has actually been one of the more fascinating outcomes of the impact of digital on industry. And I think, there's going to be a lot more of that happens in the future too. I think in particular, like my focus being in financial services, I think we're going to see a lot more activity in the payment space. I mean, one of my favorite examples of that is Uber, right? If you think about it, they're a payments platform at the end of the day, but they just so happen to do transportation, and now they're doing, food delivery, and next thing they're going to start doing, delivery of vaccines or whatever it is next, right? So I think it's just going to be really fascinating to see how all these companies start merging.
I was going through my brain and just trying to figure out who's not affected by digital transformation using the cloud. I think of university enrollments. I think of public school systems. Every piece of data where you've got 1,000 users or more, well, it's there. And I know it's been a long time, but Hurricane Katrina taught us, don't use paper. It gets wet. And things had to change very quickly. I mean, if you looked at the defense industry right now and its use of cloud, it might not be a commercial cloud source, but it's all their own. Every defense company uses with the Defense Department. And it has transformed the way our military operates in many ways. Some ways we don't want to know.
Do tell.
All right. Next in the chat from our attendees. Oh, one of the panelists said, I think Maddie mentioned Treseda. I actually am really excited to intern with them this summer. Congratulations to you. That's great. All right, another panelist or question for y'all. Here we go. You mentioned the backlog of work that will be present for some time because of the fears over COVID. On that thread, I'm hoping that COVID would embolden more workers to say, I want to work from home more than in the office when possible. Are you hearing more, and do you see this happening more?
There was a survey that was done, I think it was a Gartner survey just in the past 3 weeks or so, and it's here to stay. That was management's input. That I haven't seen the total survey, but you have to have redundancy no matter what. You have to, and there we are. It's the reality is, however, we need to have greater broadband across the U.S. It's got to be a utility.
Yeah, and I would add, can we put that back on the employees to like prove to the supervisors, hey, look at my productivity, look what I'm getting done. Like, you can't argue with results at the end of the day. So as long as you're producing at the bar, hopefully above, you've got a story to tell.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think generally, even before this event, flexibility was rising amongst employees, that concept, and I think it's here to stay now. And I think flexibility in terms of where, how you work, and obviously this has been huge, obviously with the advent of like the gig economy at large, but I think it's here to stay. One of the actually interesting things I think is going to happen, and this is a hypothesis more than anything, is we're going to pull back on a lot of the real estate trends that were taking place with working. So I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how a lot of the co-location, cohabitation companies do during and after this event. And I think a lot of companies that have been kind of transforming their real estate, like their offices, to be more open, collaboration, hoteling. I think it's going to be interesting to see how we as human beings want to go back into the workplace, dealing with such a, being mindful of like the hygiene and things like that are obviously top of mind right now. So it's just going to be really interesting to see what happens in the next year around this topic.
Like, take my cube back up, like, I didn't even think about that. That is interesting for sure. Oh man, definitely a lot of Purell.
It's happening already. I mean, what's happening in the workplace is people have the overnight team that cleans the place. They turn the trash cans upside down to let people know this has been disinfected. Nobody else has touched it. Every surface is wiped down. There is greater space between people. I've been reading, just because we will still need to observe separation for quite a while for safety's sake, that because you have a fixed amount of real estate for an office, for a company, that people might even start looking at shift work. Mm-hmm. It's you've got that way you can give people separation. So you have plenty of questions, I know.
Yes, we've got lots of questions.
Yeah.
So what are common stumbling blocks when looking to adapt new technologies? And is that a human caribou pillow behind you? Is another question. 2 parts to that one. I'm not sure who that was for. JW, if you're listening, let us know which panelist you think is it human caribou? Anyone know what this is? No, I would love to learn. But common stumbling blocks when looking to adapt new technologies.
I think there are certain people who are resistant to change no matter what. I mean, if you look at the Sheldons of the world from Big Bang Theory, I want my tuna fish sandwich every day. I want things just to be this way. Nothing, please, ever change. And the reality is there are certain people, and you need to be able to identify who will be most resistant to change and what do they need to understand that this is going to help all of us be better, and that there's what's the advantage for them. If maybe there is none, but be honest about it.
Yeah, one of the stumbling blocks I would say is around readiness and training and things like that. I think with more millennials and Gen Zs coming into the workplace, I think their expectation for how they learn and how they get ready to move on to like a new platform and use a new system, I think is just going to be generally different. And I think a lot of companies also probably don't approach it as effectively. And what I mean by that is, if you think about it, in our normal day-to-day lives as consumers, we deal with change all the time, right? We all have a phone. Our apps get updated very often, and we just learn how to deal with it, right? But when we go into the workplace, all of a sudden we have a different cap on, and all of a sudden it's like the world is ending if someone asks us to do something differently, and that's what it feels like sometimes. So I think that's going to change over time, but I think a lot of employers should start thinking about doing that training, doing that readiness within the flow of work. I think that's just going to be a lot more effective than pulling you away from your day job to formally train you.
I wanted to tag on to that, Niema. I know that if there is a massive amount of change where people really have to learn to do something new and different, most organizations don't budget enough time for people to learn something new. I remember I had to create 72 hours of training for some manufacturing engineers on an implementation once. And honestly, it should have been over 100 hours, but I pulled it down to 72 hours, and I said, okay, there's some necessary things that I can teach them post go live. And not being given the time and the budget to do training adequately leads into readiness issues.
All right, next question. How do you see the concerns about data privacy interacting with efforts to further employ networking, mobile, and web technologies, especially in the context of needs likely to arise from trying to work in a post-pandemic society? Who wants to tackle that one?
Well, a lot of the talk is right now, especially, I mean, we have this transitional plan that people are trying to create to return to the workplace. And America is a very closed society when we look at the privacy of our information compared to Taiwan, where they would be, okay, here's my device, you track me, and I will make sure that I use my government cell phone tracking device so that you can follow me and see that I haven't moved, I've been quarantined after I was exposed. And I don't think we would accept that at this point in American social behaviors, to say, okay, I will have Big Brother quarantine me and I'll let them watch me. So, I mean, if we look at what needs to be done with the waves of illness that we anticipate with this pandemic, there are some privacy issues where we're both gonna, where the public, the social privacy issue and the personal privacy issue, the community wellness, they're gonna be in conflict, and we're gonna have to find ways to, if you want to return to work, we got to have a safe community and a safe workplace. So if you've been exposed to coronavirus and have recovered, and we deem that for 1 year you're good to work, good, and you won't get other people sick. But if you're gonna get other people sick, that's, do people want to reveal that? Do you want to reveal that I don't get vaccinated every year? I mean, we don't do that in our society. We have to think about it. Mm. It's a big detail that we have to think through, and policy issues that we have to think through on that.
Yeah, that's big. And in terms of virtual security, I'm definitely not a security expert. I'm usually the one that's like asking security to just like let it happen. I'll be honest, but every CISO or head of security that I've ever worked with is good at their job because they're very risk averse, and this is going to make them uncomfortable. I don't have an answer, but it's a great call out because yes, we are starting to force companies and teams to think about working remote, and we're not comfortable exposing certain data behind firewalls. You know what I mean? It's a larger conversation, and one that we could have security experts on for an hour talking about, but like I can tell you, I just know in the back of my head, there's already a lot of concern going on about it.
We do have a security expert dialing in a couple hours, so we'll have to ask him this question too. Sorry, Niema, go ahead.
No, I totally agree. I mean, one of the interesting things for me, I think, is as it relates to privacy, what I'm starting to see at least is there's a parallel between value and privacy. And so I think if organizations, or whether that be even government, if you're able to provide value, people are willing to give up a lot of information and let down a lot of privacy for that. Like one of the easiest examples of this is like 23andMe, right? People will physically, share their like genetic DNA, like they're willing to share that because they get some value proposition back for it. So I think if in this instance, if you think about the government or large organizations that have access to this data, if you're able to create the right value proposition, I think will see a voluntary opt-in to some of this type of stuff.
I think we've got the HR issues on it though, and it really has to end up being policy.
That same attendee just commented, giving up some privacy may become an employment requirement.
True.
I think we have time for one more. We're at 5:57, and I know we've got another great talk coming up soon. Last one. What are creative ways to make remote meetings engaging and fun? And I'll say to this person, we will be releasing Gant Laborde's talk from last night. If you missed it, you got to watch it. He spoke about a lot of that, how to lead a global remote workforce, and it was engaging to say the least. But I'll let y'all tackle any advice you have there as well.
I have to watch that.
It's so good.
I don't know. I'm so curious to hear what you guys think, but I will say, like, I took for granted how easy it was to engage in person. Like, there's just natural, I can feed off the energy naturally. So we are going to have to be more conscious about like the effort you put into these meetings. But I've been a part, like this one has been great. And I've been a part of others. I was on a Wednesday morning talk, and like we all changed our Zoom background and like had to explain what it meant about us. Right. So, there are ways to do it. I still think, in person is still going to be my favorite. Maybe it's because I just miss, social interaction right now. I would love to hug a friend or something. But I think there's ways around it. And we've had some success. Like we've had hat days with the team, wear your funniest hat, and you just have to make it a conscious effort.
Well, if there are other thoughts on that one, we may have time for another question.
I think it's a basic of marketing. You have to know who's there and what do they need, what do they like, what do they prefer. And we can all be creative with it because technology is going to help us be more creative.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, at 5:59, do y'all think we have time for one more? Should we call it for today? One more Valerie votes? All right. Okay. Shockingly, financial institutions are still relying on mainframe technology, COBOL, JCL, MVS, the knowledge workers of which are retired or dying off. What do you foresee the industry's response to this growing issue going forward?
Great question. Great question. I see and hear that all the time in my line of work. And I think the answer to it is, workforce transformation. I think a big part of this is going to have to be, you're going to have to adopt that technology. That goes without saying. But then you have to transform your workforce as a part of that too. So I think there is going to be massive investment, especially in the financial services sector, around technology skills for the future. And, you know, finally just cutting that cord with your old systems and your old mainframe, right? And even more recently, like state governments are dealing with this. They're starting to pay out crazy amounts of money for people who have COBOL skills. So it's going to change. I think this event's just pouring the gas on the fire.
Awesome. Cool. We are right at 6 p.m. So we've got to end and move on to the next one. Thank you all so much for your time, for sharing your wisdom. I'm grateful, and I'm sure all the attendees dialed in are as well. If you want to stay on, I'll switch you over to an attendee so you don't have to miss the next talk. And
Thank you.
appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.